So thank you very much for coming today to the best day of Develop, the audio track. I'm very pleased to see so many of you here because I know there's quite a lot of alcohol drank last night, so I'm very impressed. First of all, I'm Adele Cutting, and it's my pleasure to be the host this year. It's been an amazing year for games, and John Broomhall has done an amazing job getting together some of the best speakers for you to talk about their work over the last year. I know I'm personally very excited to learn and listen to all the talks today. So, first of all, few housekeeping things. First of all, there's 15 minutes between every one of the presentations today. That's probably because we're likely to overrun. We come and go with, where we are. We're not strict on our timings. However, I do ask that you get back into the room 3 to 4 minutes before the speech is meant to start, just so that it doesn't disrupt the speakers when they're talking. Another really important thing is after Eric's brilliant speech, we're going to be moving to room 1 because there's just too many of us. So after Eric's, please move across. It's all like go out of the doors, right, and then left to the end of the corridor. That's where we're going to be. Please turn your devices to silent. That would be great. And on behalf of Develop and myself, have a brilliant day. So first of all, I'd like to invite Eric Nielsen from CCP up onto the stage to talk about finding the signal in the noise, prioritizing sound in EVE Online's vast universe.
Testing. Can you hear me? Yeah. Great. Hi. I'm really honored to be opening this day today. I'm really honored that I'm even chosen to be here, so I hope you enjoy what I have to say. My name is Eric Nielsen. I'm the senior audio programmer for EVE Online. I have a background, thank you. I have a background in sound design, and I'm a drummer, and I've been working as an audio programmer for about 5 years now. The first half of my career, I was working in cloud infrastructure, building cloud infrastructure. That's actually how I got hired to CCP, and then I transitioned to the best job in the world, honestly. I'm just curious, by a raise of hands, how many people have actually played EVE Online in this room? And I'm not judging, it's not a judgy thing. Okay, and how many have played in the past year? Oh, wow, that's actually more than I expected. Cool. For those of you that don't know it, EVE Online is a sci-fi MMO. It's 20 years old. It was released in 2003, and it actually became 20 years old this year on May 9th. It's a single sharded instance, so all the players can interact with each other through 7,805 solar systems. And you may know it for the massive battles that it has, the PvP battles, or maybe you know it for its infamous learning curve. But it's really important, at least, to give you an idea of a snapshot of the gameplay of EVE before we talk about the sound in it. EVE is, I would explain it as a third-person tactical game, at least when it comes to the combat. It has a lot of deeper systems, but we don't have 4 hours to talk, so the video I'm going to show you next, this will kind of give you an idea of the main core combat loop, which is orbiting something, locking onto it, and then shooting.
Several frigates are breaking away from the pack. They're targeting those civilian ships.
This will be your first combat experience as a capsuleer. Time to show these hostiles what you're truly made of. Orbit the frigate first. We're too far away, Captain. Thankfully, our ship is equipped with a module that will boost our speed. Activate the afterburner module highlighted on your display. My database of ancient... We're now within range. Lock your target. Target lock confirmed. Time to hit them where it hurts. Fire at will, Captain. Make sure to use both of your guns.
That's it, Captain. Let him have it.
Another hostile ship incoming. A cruiser this time.
So what you may have noticed from that video is that the camera is incredibly free. In the middle of that, I actually, like normal players probably wouldn't have jumped to look at that ship, but it was just to show you that I can do that at any time. So why am I here today? I'm here to talk about how I developed a sound prioritization system for EVE Online. I'm in no way saying that I made it better than anyone could in this room, but I know for a fact that watching the process of how someone thinks about a problem can help in a lot of cases, because that's how I came to my solution. And basically the problem that we had in EVE Online for 19 years was that there was a potentially unlimited amount of players that could meet in any one space, which means that there's a potentially unlimited amount of, there's a potentially unlimited number of ways that sounds can be played that we can't know beforehand. Interestingly enough, I bought this book last month, and this is actually covered in a chapter, so that was pretty cool. I wish I would have had that earlier. This is kind of the timeline. So I'll be walking you through like the story of how the first time I started thinking about this to when I actually solved it, and giving you some examples. So let's go back to 2019. In 2019, I had recently become an audio programmer. I was transitioning from Python to C++. And as I looked online at what our players were saying, I could find, going all the way back to 2006, that it was a regular thing to say that you needed to turn your audio off when you got into big fights. And they weren't wrong. It did destroy your machine, and it did not sound good. So this became a mantra in our player base. And so in 2019, I got the first spark that helped me figure out how to solve this problem. And that spark was actually here in Develop 2019. It was from a talk given by John Newman and David Osternacher. They were explaining how they managed the audio in their Total War games. And they had a lot of similar challenges to EVE. Namely, the players had free control of the camera. Because of that, they needed to have really detailed sounds when you were up close, but also provide good ambience when you're far away. And they also hit the limits of Wise's voice limiting system like we were. Spark number 2 came in the form of a tech demo that CCP did in collaboration with Hadean. This was built in Unreal Engine 4, and the whole purpose of this was to get as many players as possible having a dogfight. And the audio programmer in London at the time, Alex Blunt, who I will forever be grateful to because they reached out to me when they didn't necessarily have to. They kind of took me under their wing. They had built a sound prioritization layer for this that they nicknamed Event Horizon. And they had built it in a way that was meant to be open source and pluggable into any game engine. So I decided to try that out in EVE in 2019. Here's just the basic concepts. It's really very, very simple. Event Horizon would, per tick, it would keep a prioritized list of all the audio emitters based on the distance of the audio emitter to the listener. And it would keep the first 100 alive and let Wise know about it, and it would hide the rest. And you can notice on the bottom left, so that's the CPU from Wise. I had the profiler running, and it was regularly hitting 100%. It just couldn't keep up. So after Event Horizon, this is what it sounded like. showed immediate promise, but it wasn't quite there. Just plugging it in didn't work. The good parts is that it was not hitting 100%. CPU was like about 80% on my computer, which is a fairly decent computer. And in particular, the thing that made me excited is that when you zoomed out, the CPU was almost 0, because up to this point, we were rendering all the audio for everything in a solar system, no matter where your camera was. And it was, it just sounded cleaner. But the cons at that time, at least, I would have had to make it be multi-threaded, because the Eve client is multi-threaded, and this was meant for a single thread. And it was really hard to expand to prioritize audio emitters based on anything like this. This is because of the open source way it was made. It's supposed to be generic and pluggable. That adds a little bit of overhead. And honestly, I wasn't ready to dive into C yet. I probably was, but I made it a boogeyman in my head. Some of you might be asking, does the Wise already do this? And yes, it does. You can use voice limiting, you can use virtual voices. But when you have this massive scale that we're trying to do, in particular, killing and restoring infinite loops, you can't keep an infinite amount of virtual voices. And like I said, when you have a scale like this, your game engine needs to protect Wise's command queue a little bit. And most of the CPU usage was coming from just broadcasting the positions of all the audio emitters in the scene. So I put Event Horizon on the shelf, and other priorities came up. And then in October of 2021, our sound designers wanted to add some new engine sounds that were developed by Noiseworth. And this is an example of like the biggest ship in our game. This is what it sounded like. By the way, that ship is as big as the Empire State Building. So during this project, the sounds that we were given were a little bit more complex. Before this, the engine sounds were only using one voice. After this, they were, like on average, they had 7 voices if you take the blend containers into account. And I did everything I could to make this work with Wise's voice limiting system. So I put a dynamically shifting voice level limit on the bus that would change depending on how many ships were in the scene. We had split up the sounds into 4 categories, and I was limiting each one of those categories individually. And still at the end, the CPU was just way too high. And so even because Eve is so old, we have a lot of different types of machines that we have to be able to make it work on. So on minimum spec machines, it was hitting about 80%. We did a lot of testing around that. And the other downside to this was that regularly your own ship, the player's own ship, would get cut off, like the sound of the engine. So I knew that it was time to kind of put some work back into the sound prioritization problem. And we had an event coming up called Eve Fan Fest, where all of our players, not all of them, but some of our players come to Iceland to celebrate Eve and meet each other. So I thought it would be a really good time to get a prototype going. I put it in the same place that I put Event Horizon, and I decided not to use Event Horizon, and I'm still don't know if that was the right decision or not. I think it was in the end, but I would have liked to do a more open source thing. But I just decided that as the only audio programmer, I didn't have the time to maintain an open source library. So I wrote my own so that I could get it out quicker. And so the differences of my solution at this time for this prototype is that the number of audio emitters, I changed that from 100 to 75 to keep alive at any one time. It just sounded better. And instead of using an API to determine if a sound was a loop or a one-shot, I used the Wise authoring API to just have implicit knowledge of this. And surprisingly, this one surprised me. Instead of, so when when you cull an audio emitter, you stop all the sounds that it's playing. And I figured out that if you used break, I had never known about this, but this is a concept in Wise where you will stop a sound, but it'll let it finish to the end. So I figured out that that sounded much better to use break on one-shots than just stopping and fading them out. The metadata that I get is collected after you generate sound banks, and it's put into a JSON file. It kind of looks like this. So this is, whenever I get an event sent to me, I can look up whether it's a loop or not. So the next video is me presenting this at FanFest of 2022. I don't think I'll ever get that kind of applause for like a technical thing I've ever done. That was really fun. But everyone was pretty excited about it. So from that point, it was time to expand on that prototype. So between May 2022 and August, I got to work on it. And the first thing I did is, like, most of our players are not in a scene where they're being shot by thousands of ships in one point. That's not normal. So I ended up, the first thing I did was I jumped into the very first scene of our NPE, our new player experience. And this is what it sounded like. It was completely silent. And I wasn't sure why, but after I did some digging, it's because there's actually 121 audio emitters in that scene. Because of old systems. It's an old game, there's a lot of things I don't know going on still. And all the emitters that were being prioritized based on distance were dead. They were not like the things in the back of the scene. Here's like this is kind of a debug view that I use. The bubbles or the attenuation sphere. So that's kind of what it looked like when you turn that on. So at that time I knew it was just time to get to work. And I spent a lot of time just sitting in 3 different scenes and trying to figure out why things weren't working. And what came out of that was 7 additional weights that I would apply to an audio emitter. And so basically, an audio emitter can have a weight between the minimum value and the maximum value of a flow. Yeah, so an audio emitter can have a weight between the minimum and the max. And what you're seeing here is from top to bottom, it's the most important thing to the least important thing when it comes to calculating whether an audio emitter should live or not. I'll go over that more. You'll see a video that will make more sense. Most of this I could do through the metadata layer, which is awesome because that means I didn't have to calculate this on the fly and I could just get it from static data. This is kind of what the JSON looks like afterwards. Here's the pseudocode for the final algorithm. Basically, it goes through each audio emitter and it will calculate the distance from the emitter to the camera or the listener in this case. And then it calculates the final calling weight. Those weights that you saw earlier, it'll add them up and figure out how important it is. It'll sort all those from smallest to largest, and then it'll keep the top 75 and it'll get rid of the rest. And this bit up here is done in parallel using Intel's TDB library, which really sped everything up significantly. So here's just the like formula for an emitter. It's the distance from the listener minus, so I had to scale those weights that you saw in relation to the distances in Eve because it's massive. And then you can add your own a custom additional weight as well. And I used that custom additional weight to keep 3 emitters alive at all times. The listener, obviously, otherwise you don't have sound. The music audio emitter, which handles all the music in our game, and the UI audio emitter, which handles all the UI. Here's a debug view of like the calculations happening on the fly. That's kind of what it looks like. So I'm going to show you a video. When I first made this talk, I made a really bunch of really boring diagrams, and I was going to just go through the diagrams, and I realized that it sucked. So I realized that in the game, I can just show you how this works, because all of this is configurable in real time. So the next video is going to be that first scene from the NPD that was silent. And it'll start how it sounds now, and then I will get rid of all of these weights, not the top one, but I'll get rid of each one at a time, and it'll kind of make sense rather than me sitting here explaining dumb diagrams. On the left, you'll see, do you see that in the corner? Yeah, okay. On the left, you'll see that debug view, and on the top, this is where I'm like putting commands in, and I'll kind of explain it as well. So I enable the debug display. This will give you a more visual representation. I'll explain 2D weights later. This is all the emitters that are in range of the listener. This is all the emitters that are actively playing sounds. So I'm disabling them. I'll explain this concept later. These are ones that are visible to the camera. And these are ones that are used historically. And we get back to that state where it's completely silent. So now you'll see me add those from the bottom to the top, so you can hear how it all comes together again. So used emitters are first. That's historically used. They have played a sound in the past. That gets away to 50. Audio emitters that are visible to the camera. Once again, I'll explain that later. It doesn't apply here. Anything actively playing a sound. And anything in attenuation range. So in that scene, it was the range weight that was most important. But the other scene I would use was that first battle scene that I showed you to demonstrate the gameplay, because it had a semi-realistic, like kind of how you would see players fight each other, and I could run it over and over. And that's where I came up with this concept of waiting one shot, which is fixed a lot. I'm really surprised about. So basically, the reason that I built this, so what a waiting one shot is if you have a ship over here, and you have the camera over here, and this ship starts shooting its turret, but you zoom in really fast right after that point, then you'll get the animation, but not the sound, because previously this emitter here was dead. So what a waiting one shot is I give it a 50 millisecond window. If an audio emitter is dead and it gets, and it's requested to play a one shot, it'll be marginally bumped up in the prioritization list for 50 milliseconds. So if the camera gets within range of that, then it'll play the sound. Now, you can get it, like the visuals might be a little bit out of sync, but it's better than having the awkward moment of silence. And it actually adds a bit more atmosphere during battle as well. So this next scene, it'll be the same kind of thing. You'll see a combat scene instead, And I will do the same thing where I disable one by one all of the weights and then enable them again. So here's the debug. Here's the waiting one shot. And it crashed. That's cool. Oh, it didn't crash. That's great. Hold on one second. Let's see if I can skip forward. Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah. So this is after. This is just distance-based prioritization now. No other weights are being added. So now I'm going to re-enable all the bits. Actually, no, first I enabled waiting one shot. So this is the only waiting one shot. That now has more clarity. And now I start enabling it. It's really interesting that you need all of these weights. It's like it's a cumulative effect. You can't just have one or the other. And honestly, for a different game, you'd probably have different things that are important. And the other weight that I haven't explained yet, well, there's two. There's vital sounds. You can't actually change the value on this. For more cinematic instances, we needed to allow sound designers to say that a sound is too important to be killed. So in the WISE authoring program, there's a custom property called calling vital, which will be taken into account. If any event is pointing this sound, then it'll be bumped up as high as possible. However, with great power comes great responsibility, so that would be bad if you just made everything vital. The other one is 2D sounds. Sounds that don't have attenuation, they have the second highest weight in our game, because if you have something that's stereo, you probably meant to make it be heard. I had a video about that, but I had to cut it. So when it comes to scaling, so I'm just reminding you that when I type in those values, 400 actually gets scaled to 4 billion because it needs to match the distances in Eve for it to be effective. There's other stuff that's configurable in real time. You can actually change the like window for the waiting one shot. So it's currently at 50 milliseconds. Originally, I tried 10. That didn't work. so that you can play around with that on the fly. You can also change the number of max audio emitters. It seems like 25 is actually pretty decent. And then you can change that scaling amount I talked about. So how is the performance though? So in Wise's side, when I was working on this, this is what it looked like for this amount of ships on my computer. It was hitting about 20%. Now it's probably a little bit more because we've added more complicated turret sounds. But the important thing to know here is that at least there's a cap. Wise will only ever know about 75 audio emitters at once. So the only way you can make this CPU usage go up is by making more complicated sounds or using more complicated effects. And of course, there's some offload onto the Eve engine. So these are snapshots I took from telemetry. For 10,000 audio emitters, it takes a little bit less than 1 millisecond per tick to calculate this. For 20,000, it's about 2 milliseconds. That comes out to 1% of the processing time per frame. And you can kind of know that 14,000 audio emitters will equal 1 millisecond of tick time. So after I did this, it was time to test publicly. We did 2 public tests. Singularity is our public test server where players can come and see new features. Everything went really well, and it was really exciting until this one point. The cinematic explosion had no sound. And we had all the players shoot at a structure until it blew up. And I ended up figuring out that the problem for that was because 2D sounds are so important to our game, when I was collecting the metadata for all the events, it was categorizing all of our stop events as 2D. So any audio emitter in that scene that had been told to stop playing a sound was now high on the list. So it was clogging up all of that. The other things I had to fix after this public beta test was I hadn't taken into account keeping track of RTPCs while it was asleep, or states. But then we were able to release this on October 11th, 2022, and it was really exciting, and the players they're really happy about it. Whenever I go online now to any thread, and people are talking about turning off audio, there's always one dude or woman that jumps in and is like, you don't have to do that anymore. So at least we got the word out. And because Eve, there's so many, it's so big and it's so hard to test, and you can't cover everything. So there was a few like edge cases that I had to fix after release. And in particular, I didn't take into account that Wise can post another event. So I had to recursively get metadata about Wise events. So here's my final thoughts on this whole project. The cons of adding sound prioritization, I'll start there. There's one more layer to think about. It is more complex. Now you have the game going through sound prioritization, going through virtual voices and Wise. But if you want to have scales as big as Eve does, you have to do something. Any future feature that we add is going to have to think about this. Like, I don't know, maybe occlusion or something. You would have to make sure that it works in this system. Otherwise, everything will be wonky. Loops, when they are restored right now, are only played from the beginning, but that hasn't really been a problem yet. And it works about 95% of the time, but not 100%. So in most cases, it'll work. But like I said, it's impossible to get yourself into every situation that a player will be in. So we keep finding a few oddities. And it can cause a lot of confusion when sound designers are trying to figure out what's wrong, because they don't know if it's this layer or something else. But the pros outweigh the cons. We can have more modern sound design. After this was released, we added new turret sounds that we've been waiting on for a long time. And the whole mix, it's not just in large battles that improved, like the whole thing became cleaner. And most importantly, turning off audio was not it's not a necessity anymore in these large scales like it used to be. It's just a preference. My key takeaways for this, though, is voice limiting. It is a good system, but it's better for smaller scales and when you know what's coming next. And the backbone of this whole thing is just the gathering of metadata. As boring as that sounds, that's just the truth. And that's because I don't have to calculate things on the fly. And real-time configurability was massively important. I can't tell you how many hours, I probably shouldn't even admit that I just sat there and tweaked those numbers that I was showing you. And you're often, well, I'm often my own worst enemy. So there's a lot of times where I could have started this earlier, but I just didn't think I had it in me. And honestly, game audio it's an odd, beautiful niche, and I'm so happy to be doing this. It's like I found a dream job that I can't even believe this exists in the world as a job. And this sound prioritization layer is a good example of something that you couldn't just do with only technical knowledge. You also really need this sound design background. And game audio programming, there's a lot of decisions that you make to make it sound better, but not necessarily be performant. And it's just a really blurry line. And I've talked to a few audio programmers here, and it seems like audio programmers are doing technical art, or like they're all over in the code base, and not everyone knows what an audio programmer is, even within my own company. But most importantly, honestly, is the people you work with. These are the 3 sound designers that I work with regularly. We have 4 sound designers at CCP. And I couldn't, I'm just so grateful to be able to take their beautiful sounds that they make and to make it come out in a much better way. Thank you. I think we have time for questions, if you have any. Yeah, I think they're going to bring a mic, actually.
Thank you for your talk. This is really amazing. And Eve is one of my favorite games
Okay.
that I go back to every couple of years because it's just so big and inspiring. I was wondering how, if time dilation on big battles affected
I knew this was coming.
your system in any way.
So in Eve, we have a system. When we have too many people in a system, we have to slow the tick rate so that we can effectively process what's happening. And I would love to tackle that problem and figure out how to make that sound good. But no, unfortunately, that's basically how that works now. Is when it's slowed down, you'll still get the real-time sounds. But hopefully we get to tackle that soon. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh. Gotta run.
What did you say was the benefit from breaking versus stopping in Wise when calling a sound?
Oh, yeah. So that was one of the things I was most surprised about. So when you call an audio emitter, if there's a one-shot playing, so usually what I would do is stop it and fade it out. But once I started using break, it really changed this, because when you were close up to something and you would stop it, then you would hear all these sounds to stop. But when you were using break, it allows it to finish until the end. So it stops processing the audio emitter, but it will allow the sound to finish, which gives a much better atmosphere. You don't get this feeling that sounds are stopping as much.
And if it is a loop?
If it's a loop, you still stop that and you fade it out. But you keep track of that loop so that you can bring it back when the audio emitter is woken up. I hope that made sense. Okay.
Thanks so much for the talk again. Really enjoyed it. The custom property in Wise for the sound designers can set to have max value. Does that also go through to the metadata?
Yeah. So that's why I put it. I wanted to put it where sound designers could actually change it. And I found that Wise had this thing where you can add your own properties. So after sound bank generation, when all the metadata is being collected, that's just one of the things that it looks for.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Oh, all the way back there.
Hey, so you said that the metadata is taken after the sound bank generation.
Yeah.
Does that also work with Wise's newer systems where it's the event-based packaging, where the sound banks are like individual to events?
So we don't have Wise. I have to build event-based packaging, but we don't use Unreal. So
okay,
it will if I ever do that.
Cool.
But yeah, yeah, it would probably work in that case too. I've looked into that a little bit. It's on my radar of things that I would like to do for Eve.
Cool. Well, we'll try it. We'll let you know if it works.